Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be going over custom mob spawners. Yes, I just took a shower, so my hair is a bit wet and I'm a little bit tired as well. So sorry if my voice does sound a little bit weird, but today we're going to be going over both types of mob spawners. And if you're wondering what I mean by both types of mob spawners, I mean item mob spawners and the regular tile entity mob spawners, which are the mob spawners that you can place from your inventory and the mob spawners that are already in the world. For the most part, they use the exact same structure, which means I'll just be going over the regular tile entity mob spawners first because they are a little bit more simplistic than the item mob spawners. And that all entails going over custom mobs like custom particle effects, custom armor, custom drop chances, multiple mobs spawning from the same spawner, and some general spawner physics. Let's just get right into it though. So first off, we're going to need to have a world generated. I'm going to use Cemu for this, but of course you can also use Minecraft on the Wii U and then port it off. But I'm going to get a mob spawner. I like to place mine off of the ground just because I can. And I'm going to place it in line with those villagers there. Then I like to put a mob in mind just to have a location point of where in the data in UME we're going to put the mob. And I'm also going to want the mobs to spawn, so I'm just going to quickly set it to night so I don't have to set it to night every time we come back into this world. And I'm going to set that mob in just like that and then get the world exited and saved. The second way to get mob spawners, the item mob spawners, will not require you to have a spawner in the world, but it's very useful to have at least one spawner that's in world somewhere to base off of for that item spawner. Now I'm going to get the world ported off of Cemu, and remember you can make that super easy with my program, which will be linked in the description, or you can just port it off of your Wii U. Once that's all sorted, I'm going to open up UME and open up that tutorial world we just took out. So here we have the tutorial world, and I'm going to go into the chunk locator. If you need anything about the chunk locator, you can view my last video about villagers. And I'm going to navigate to the chunk that this mob spawner is in, which happens to be in the same chunk as the villagers. So I'm going to hit open this up, and we're going to see all of this data. We have our villagers from last time, which we don't need to worry about. And then we have in the tile entities section, this mob spawner with the creeper in it. So first off, I'm going to open up the mob spawner compound. And underneath here, there are going to be a bunch of things. It's pretty easy to get misled with mob spawners. They might honestly be one of the more complicated things to do just because there are so many tags inside of a mob spawner. But I want to explain some basics about mob spawners before anything else. First off, there are two main sections here, the spawn data and the spawn potentials. The spawn potentials are going to be the continuous spawns, and the spawn data is going to be the singular starting mob. That's going to be confusing at first, but let me describe further. Essentially, in the spawn data, we have a creeper, and what this means is the very first mob that this mob spawner spawns is going to be the mob right here, this creeper. In spawn potentials, we have the reoccurring chances to spawn multiple more mobs. So I can copy this compound right here under spawn potentials, click onto spawn potentials, and paste a new one in. And now you'll see it says right here that there is a 50% chance to spawn either of these mobs. Now both of them are a creeper, so it doesn't make a difference, but I could open these up and change them to different things. So I'm going to change this one to a spider, and how about I change this one up here to a witch, and the first one is going to remain a creeper. I don't want to make any edits to this spawner yet, just to showcase exactly how this is working. So I'm going to save my changes and just show this guy. So I'm just going to load into the Cemu world. I've cranked up the gamma so you can see, and as you can see, I'm just going to pause right away there because that was really quick. That creeper spawned right away because it's the very first mob that the mob spawner spawns. It spawns a creeper. And then we go into the spawn potentials area. So we spawn the spawn data, and now we are in the spawn potentials. So the potential to spawn a spider or a witch has happened, and it's first chosen a spider. So what's happened is this spider has moved into the spawn data area. So if I exit it right now, it would be a spider in the spawn data now. But what's going to happen is it chose a spider again. If we wait here long enough, though, there's going to be that 50% chance to have a witch spawn, though. So I'm just going to wait here for a minute until that happens in time lapse. And as you can see, the spawn data just switched to a witch. So as we can see over here, the spawn data is now a witch, which means the enemy that's going to spawn is a witch. So I'm just going to exit the world to show you how the data has changed since this spawner has started spawning things. So I'm going to exit and save real quick and go back into UME. So this is the original save that we had before, but I've ported off a second WE file that's just called tutorial off, and I'm going to open that up in another tab. If we navigate to that mob spawner once again right over here, I'm going to open that up, go into the tile entities tag, open up the mob spawner, and I'm just going to expand the same points of data that we had before. You can see that this spawn data is being switched to the spawn potentials as the spawner continues its life cycle. So see, the spawn data is now the witch instead of that creeper. Essentially what this means is unless you're using a placeable item spawner, this spawn data doesn't actually matter and we don't need to edit it. So I'm going to leave this alone for now, meaning our actual mob spawns are down here. As you can see, this is 50% and this is a 50% chance, but we have this property called weight right here, and changing this weight is what changes that chance. Basically, the way that these potentials are determined is by adding up the total sum of weights and using that as the denominator, where the weight of the singular entity is the numerator in chance. If that sounds confusing, just watch this. I'm going to change this to a weight of 4, and this one at the bottom is going to stay a weight of 1. 1 plus 4 is going to be 5, and if I divide 1 by 5, we would get 20%, and if I divide 4 by 5, we would get 80%. To make this a little bit simpler, you can just use values of 100, so I could put in here 80, and I could put into this one 20. Obviously, 80 plus 20 is 100, and that means that this is 80% and this is 20%. And I can add as many of these different spawn potentials as I want. So perhaps I want to add another one here, and this one is going to be a cave spider instead. So I'm just going to get the Minecraft cave spider typed out there, and this one is going to be a 10%. And I'm going to make sure this is still 100, so it's going to be a 10% chance to spawn either spider and an 80% chance to spawn a witch. And that's how you would do multiple mobs. Now, I'm just going to work with one mob in this video, so we aren't doing anything extra complicated. Any specific mob can just have a weight of 1 if there's only one mob here. And we're going to basically edit this witch. The only issue with editing this witch, though, is that it has a really basic set of tags. All it has is the actual ID of what the mob is. So we're going to need to copy from a different mob in the world to get a higher level of tags on the mob. So I'm just going to go into our entities area here, and the villagers are an example of something that has lots and lots of tags, but we don't want the specific villager tags. I want things that a spider would have. So if I open up this spider mob here, you're going to see a bunch of tags, and this is exactly how we want our spider to be in the mob spawner. So I'm just going to copy this spider. I'm going to delete this thing that's called entity under the spawn potentials. So I'm going to delete this. I'm going to click back on this entry right here in the spawn potentials and paste one in. Then I want to double click on this and rename it entity with a capital E. Once that's done, we have a spider with a bunch of tags going on that is much more useful to us. The thing we need to do before spawning any mobs in with this spawner is make sure that the UUID is removed from this mob. This mob cannot have a UUID because we need to be spawning new versions of the mob, not same versions of the old mob. So we're just going to make sure we have that UUI deleted out of the mob. Before we go about editing this spider to spawn in as a custom mob, we should probably actually edit the tags of our mob spawner to make sure that our mob spawner is acting how we want it as well. So if I right click on this mob spawner, there is a drop down for spawner properties, and there are a bunch of different things here that I'll go over. So the spawn count is the maximum amount of mobs that can spawn at once from the mob spawner when it does spawn, which we'll get to how it spawns in a little bit. But I'm just going to change this to 2 to make it so only 2 spiders can spawn at once. The spawn range is how far away the mob spawner can spawn its mobs. So I'm going to make this 10. The mob spawner can spawn its mobs 10 blocks in any direction. The player range is how close players have to be for the mob spawner to work. I'm going to make this really short just as an easy demonstration, and I'm going to change this to 4. So the player has to be 4 blocks in range for this to work. The max nearby is how many of this mob can already be nearby before the mob spawner will stop spawning mobs. So if there are 6 spiders nearby this spawner, it won't spawn any more spiders. The max nearby property doesn't usually need to be edited unless you're working in a confined space where the mobs can't get away from the spawner. So I'm just going to leave this as 6. And then we have these last 3 properties which have to do with the spawn delay and how the spawner actually works. So essentially what happens is the spawner starts at a delay of 0. This delay is the active count of the delay of the spawner. So what I should say about spawners is that they count in ticks. Rather, Minecraft game ticks which there are 20 of per second. So this actively counts 20 numbers per second here, and this is the active number. I'm just going to set this delay to 0 since it doesn't exactly matter what the delay is on, since the spawner is placed in the world and not an item mob spawner. And then we're going to worry about these two other properties, min delay and max delay. In between the bracket of the min delay and the max delay is when this mob can spawn. So perhaps if we set this to, I'm going to do 100 and 200, which we can divide by 20 to figure out exactly how long that is. 100 divided by 20 is going to be 5, and 200 divided by 20 is going to be 10. That means that in between every 5 and 10 seconds, this mob will spawn a mob. So the way this works is this delay is going to be counting 20 per second. It's going to go 20, 40 at 2 seconds, 60 at 3 seconds, and it's going to go up. And let's say it gets to 120, and randomly in this bracket here, since we are in the bracket of 100 and 200, at 120, it's going to spawn the mob. And when it spawns the mob, it's not going to keep counting and go up to 140. It's going to set this delay back to 0 and start counting again. So basically, in between 100 and 200 here is when our mob can spawn in game ticks. So once these properties are complete, I'm just going to hit the check mark, and I'm going to go into game and show you that this mob is now spawning a lot quicker than it was previously. So I am just loading up into the world here. I'm going to clear out the mobs from last time just by setting this into peaceful and then into normal. And as you can see, the player range is working as we intended. So the mob is not spinning. There's like no orange particles coming off because we are not in the required player range to spawn this mob. So I'm going to get closer to the spawner, which will spawn that witch, and it's going to start spawning skeletons relatively quickly because we set that min and max delay relatively quickly as well. So there we can see one of the skeletons popping into existence right there. In a little bit as well, another skeleton is going to pop its way into existence. There is another one, and they're just going to keep coming here relatively quickly because our one spawn potential is that skeleton and everything. So we've got more skeletons coming right into existence. Now we've got 3. So now that we have this spawner working, I'm going to go back into UME and we're going to edit this spawn to be a lot more custom than that. So now that we understand the mob spawner and how it works, we can actually edit this mob to be a lot more interesting. So as you saw before, you can change the mob right here. And technically our mob is actually already custom just because we changed this from a spider. We'll talk about that later. Let's first just go down the list of what happens when we click on the mob. First of all, we can change the entity properties. A lot of these you really shouldn't change if you are making a mob spawner. I don't want my mob to be silent. I definitely don't want it to be invulnerable. Ignoring gravity only works with entities like sand and gravel. Glowing doesn't work on the Wii U. No AI would mean that it's not moving, which I do want my skeletons to move around and attack. You can have these skeletons never despawn, but you probably do want the entities to despawn because if your mob spawner is spawning a bunch of mobs, it could fill up the spawn cap really quickly. I don't really want my mobs to be able to pick up loot in case someone drops something or if they walk into mob loot that's already on the ground, and it doesn't really matter if they're left-handed for me, so we're not actually going to change anything there. The position we can actually just go through and delete because if you saw in that world, my mobs were all going to a specific position, and I don't want them to spawn in a specific position. I want them to spawn in the specified spawn range of this spawner. If you do want your mobs to go to a specific position though, you can definitely set this position. I'm just going to delete this out of here. We can also custom names our mobs, so maybe I want my skeletons to be called spooky, scary skeletons, not just skeletons, and I'm going to accept that name change right there. I can also add potion effects to my mobs. I'm going to give my mobs regeneration 1. Remember that the amplifier of a potion is actually the 0 number for the maximum amount of time, so it'll last forever. And I do want to show the particle effects. Touching back on what we looked at in Villagers, briefly going over exactly what these active effects do in this active effects list, is the ambient will say if the particles are transparent, the amplifier will say what level of potion this is, so this is level 1. The ID says exactly what kind of potion it is, so this is regeneration. Show particles will say whether the particles are shown at all or not, and the duration is the amount of time in game ticks that the potion lasts. This number is basically infinite and will last forever. Going back out of this and getting back into the mobs, we have the armor and hand drops. From here, we can assign armor and items that the entity is holding. My skeletons, I want them to wear a diamond helmet, so I'm just going to find a diamond helmet really quick and put that on. And this is where we can actually do custom mob drops. The way to do custom mob drops is to give them things that they are wearing or holding. Now you want to avoid putting things on their head because entity heads are usually the most visible thing that mobs have. Even if you put like an item on their head, it will show up on like villagers, skeletons, all of that, it will show up on their head. Obviously putting any armor on the mob will show up as long as it is a standard for mob. So things like spiders and silverfish, for example, will not show their armor when they're wearing it. We can also want to avoid putting things in their hand because you can also see entities holding items for the most part, but things like spiders and villagers will not show items that are being held. So that leaves us these 3 slots right here as custom mob drops. You can of course also use the hands and head as well. It just means that those items are going to be a lot more visible. So it depends on if you want your custom drops to be visible or not. But I want my skeleton here actually to drop a new resource that I'm adding to the game, which is going to be light gray dye. So I'm going to get some light gray dye right over in the menu. I've got light gray dye right there. And I just want it to drop 1 of this light gray dye, and I'm going to accept that. But I want there to be a second chance to have a second of this light gray dye. So I'm going to get another light gray dye and put it right there, and we're going to edit the chances of this drop right here. So first off, I actually just want my mob to be wearing this diamond helmet and never drop it, so I want to set the chance to 0. Now something to know about chance 0 is that sometimes mobs will actually drop their items even though they have a % chance drop of 0. So we'll fix that in just a minute. I want this first piece of light gray dye to be guaranteed, so it's a 100% drop chance, but I want the second one to only be a 50% chance. Once this is done, I'm going to hit the check mark, and there are going to be a bunch of changes down here. So editing these specific drops are going to be in 4 different areas. Hand items is going to have the items that are in the hand. The hand drop chances shows the drop chances of those hand items. The armor items is the items in armor, and the armor drop chances are the chances as well. So as you can see, 1 here, which correlates to the same spot as this item. So this light gray dye here has a 1 times 100, which is 100 chance of dropping the light gray dye. The second light gray dye right here has a 0.5 times 100, which is 50% chance of dropping this light gray dye. This helmet should have a 0% chance of dropping the light gray dye. This one won't matter because this compound here, this like empty box, is just a nothing there. There's no item there thing. But now that we have these menus open, we can actually change things about these items. So I'm going to rename this light gray dye to Silver Tide. I'm going to hit the check mark right there. And I also want to give it an enchantment of Lure. So I'm just going to go down and give it a Lure 10 enchantment. That is sort of my enchantment I like to use. I'm just going to get rid of this drop down here. Now, if I wanted to make the same item here, I could go through and give it an enchantment and name it the same, or I can copy this item. I'm going to delete this other unenchanted gray dye out. So I'm going to hit delete, and I'm going to paste, clicking on armor items, a new version of that Silver Tide item. Then I want to make sure I move it up. Before I do that, though, I'm going to show you what happens. So as you can see, these have all moved in position. So the diamond helmet is now 100%. So if I move this up 1, it goes back to where it was. You can see that all of the chances are now aligned again. So depending on where these items are determines where they are being worn here. So obviously there's no hand items, so I don't need to worry about those, and we've got these armor items. Now, like I said before, sometimes mobs have a chance to drop their 0% drop chance items. So the way to fix this is just to enchant the item with Curse of Vanishing to make sure that if it does try to drop, it instantly vanishes. So I'm just going to give this Curse of Vanishing 1. And if you notice about armor here, and this is the same with weapons, there is an extra tag right here to make them unbreakable, which is really, really simple. You can just click this to make the item unbreakable. For this example, I don't want this helmet to break. You know, no matter how much you do attack this skeleton, the helmet is never going to break. So once I have my items all set up here, before we edit the actual attributes of the mob and how strong it is, I want to go into the game and show you this all working. So I'm going to get this saved, and let's go into Simu. So I'm just loading into the world here to test the changes that we just made. Now, because this is we copied in the save that we had before, this is going to have those spiders stuck there. But if I get close to the spawner again, it's going to spawn that witch, and the skeletons are going to start spawning. This time they won't be in that position in the corner because we don't have that set position on the mob spawner, meaning that multiple of these skeletons might spawn, and they're going to spawn nearby. So here we have one skeleton spawning in. I'm just going to grab a diamond sword really quickly so I can show you the test on exactly the mob drops that we gave this skeleton. So I'm going to grab a sword here. And as we kill this skeleton, we can see the regen effects coming off of them, named Spooky Scary Skeleton with that diamond helmet. And if I kill the skeleton, I've just got 1 Silver Tide because there was a 100% chance to get that. If I come over to this skeleton here, I can kill this one, and I have a chance to get some more Silver Tide. And there we go. That time we got the 2 Silver Tide from the drops there. And we're never going to get that diamond helmet because it has Curse of Vanishing. Let's get back into UME though, so we can get the mob buffed in terms of strength. So because I based this mob off of a spider, and spiders have 16 health, there are some things about this mob which is off. If you see down here in this tag called health, the skeleton actually only has 16 health. Also, if we go into this list over here with attributes in it, you can see there are a bunch of different attributes here. One of them is going to be max health, and the skeleton's max health is also set to 16. So we haven't went into attributes yet, but the basic of max health is that this determines the maximum health that a mob can have and not this health that it actually has. This works the same way as the spawner properties. So if we go up here, this is the maximum possible delay that the spawner can be at, but it doesn't change the actual delay that the spawner is at. That's a common misconception about max health. So if I change this max health to 20, the max health of the skeleton can be 20, and because it has the active regen effect, it's going to regenerate to 20, but when the mob spawns, it's only going to start with 16 health. So I want to change this health to match my max health at 20, meaning the mob now spawns with 20 health, which it can actually have because it has that 20 maximum health to be at. Normally, I would like to rename my mobs with their statistics, so I will like make a square bracket and have some like like saying their A values and HP values about how strong the mob is, but that's of course not required. We can also change the knockback resistance of the mob. I'm going to leave this at 0. Of course, if you add a higher level into this, the more knockback resistance it will have. You can change the movement speed. You want to be really, really careful with how you manipulate these because very low values are high movement speeds. I would recommend using the wiki page about attributes because you can scroll down into the section here and you can see in the generic movement speed here, generic movement speed section right here, you can see all of these speeds of mobs. So if we look into the area, we can find cave spiders and all of the other things right in here, and that they have a speed of 0.3. And if we do go back into UME here, we can see that the cave spider is just about at that 0.3 area. So we want to make sure that we're not buffing mobs super high. For example, some really fast mobs like dolphins, when they're swimming very quickly, have a speed value of 1.2. Dex is flying at 0.7. Evokers run at 0.5 if you want a mob that's on the ground as an example. So make sure you're buffing these speeds very carefully. We can also change the armor value on this mob as well as armor toughness. As far as I know, the armor toughness value doesn't actually work and won't show up. So I wouldn't change the armor or the armor value on this. If you do want to add armor, I would just take the armor on the actual skeleton, so it's going to be in the armor items, and give it some armor attributes, which we'll go over in another video. The follow range is going to be how far the entity will follow you. So this will mean that the entity can see me and will follow me up to 16 blocks away. You can make this something really absurd like 32 blocks away, so it'll run really far across the map to get you, but I'd probably keep this at 16 unless you have a really big battlefield and need the mobs to follow you for a long distance. Attack damage is going to be how much damage base the spider has starting in easy mode. So if you don't know, going into things like normal and hard mode will change the damage that a mob does, but this base right here is going to be the base amount of damage that a spider does in easy mode, of course, because we started with the spider mob. So if you want to figure out the exact attack damages of specific mobs, you can go into Google and find a mob. So I'm just going to type in skeleton Minecraft and get that searched up. I'm going to click on here, and it says that a skeleton does, in Java Edition, a melee of 2 damage in easy mode. So that's going to be the exact same for the spider. So I'm just going to keep this the same, but I could buff this up and make it do really, really high levels of damage. So let's just say I'm going to make the skeleton do 12 damage. It's going to follow me for 32 blocks. I'm going to make the skeleton pretty fast. So the skeletons are already a little bit fast because they're at the speed of spiders, but I'm going to buff them to 0.35, which is a relatively quick speed. I'm going to give it a bunch of knockback resistance just to as a means to say that it will really not get knocked back at all. And the max health, why don't we change that to 40? And remember, when we change the max health, we always should change the health attribute unless you want the mob to spawn with not enough health. So there we go. We've made some changes to the attributes of the mob. I'm going to get those closed out. Let's save that in and see how it works in Cemu. So I am just loading back into the world right now. Here we go. These spiders are here. Let's just get those cleared out so they're not in the way. Let's get it turned back into normal mode. And here we are. We have these skeletons about to spawn in. Now I'm probably going to need to go into survival to show you a few of these changes, like the speed and the attack damage. But as we get one of these skeletons spawned here, I'm going to hit it, and as you can see, there's basically not taking any knockback because I set the knockback resistance really high. The skeleton is walking really fast, if you can notice that too, because its speed is set up. And if I get a sword, so let's grab a just diamond sword from the creative inventory here. I'm going to grab that diamond sword. It's going to take me quite a few hits to kill this thing because it does have 40 health points. So I'm going to keep hitting and hitting, and then eventually it dies, which is a lot different compared to a normal skeleton. If you want to see a comparison, why don't we get a skeleton out of creative. So I've just got this skeleton here. Let's get another one of these skeletons spawned in. I will spawn a regular skeleton right next to it, and we will just see how different they are to kill. So I'm just going to spawn this regular skeleton right here. 1, 2, 3 hits to kill that skeleton. This one should take roughly double, but the diamond sword does 7, so it might not be exact. So I'm going to hit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hits to kill that skeleton because it has double the health. Now I do want to spawn one more of these skeletons just so I can show you how strong their attack damage is, because we did set their attack damage up really high. I'll probably die pretty much instantly to this thing. Nope, but it does a ton of damage to me and is really scary. One thing you might have also noticed about that skeleton is the fact that it was using its hands to melee me, and that's because the skeleton will not shoot with its bow unless it actually has a bow in its right hand. So going back into UME, we could go into the skeleton and edit its right hand. This is going to be the right hand right here. I know it's on the left side, but this is going to be that right hand. I'm going to move this just a little bit so you guys can see, but this is going to be the right hand right here. I could give it a bow in its hand and it would then use that bow to shoot me. So let's just add a bow into its hand. I'm going to give this a 0% drop chance. I don't want this to be dropped. And going into the hand items here, I'm going to give it Curse of Vanishing just to ensure that it doesn't drop. All the normal stuff, so Unbreakable. I'm going to enchant it with Curse of Vanishing, and now it won't drop. And I'm not going to do a specific test on this quite yet, because let's talk about item spawners. So if I go into the player section and open up my player data, this is me, I'm very invisible right now. We can go into my inventory and see that mob spawner that I am holding. And if we open up this mob spawner, we're going to see basically no data in here. Item spawners are a little bit more difficult to work with than regular spawners that have already been placed into the world. And that's because we need to add some extra tags to them just to get them working. So clicking on this mob spawner here, I'm going to add a compound, and I'm just going to call this tag all lowercase. Then making sure I'm clicked on this tag here, I'm going to add another compound, which is going to be called block, capital B, entity, capital E, tag, capital T. So now we have this compound here. I'm going to go back into my chunk with the mob spawner right here and grab that, but I don't want to get all of the data. So all I want out of this is I want the spawn data, the spawn potentials, delay, max, and nearby, all of this stuff, all of this, but I do not want the position, and I do not want this ID. I just want all of this data right here. I'm going to copy all of that. Let's go back into my player. And then while selecting the block entity tag, I'm going to paste all of that in. And now this spawner would work exactly like the other spawners that we are using. I could just place it down into the world and it would work the exact same as the other spawners. But there are a few caveats of using this. The first one is that if you plan on placing the spawner multiple times, this spawn data is going to start on the spawner every single time. And this is completely fine unless you want the first mob that spawns out of this spawner to be random every time you place it. In this case, we need to have a buffer mob. And what that means is we just have a mob that spawns in and dies immediately and probably drops nothing unless you want it to drop something, to ensure that the very first mob that comes out with this spawn data is basically just dead and doesn't matter. And then our second, or what's technically becomes our first mob, is random if we had multiple spawn potentials. So in this case, I'm just going to make a second spawn potential on the skeleton. This time it's going to be the exact same skeleton, but I want it to be a wither skeleton. So let's turn this into a wither skeleton right here. And I also want the bow to be gone out of the skeleton. I don't want him to be holding a bow, so I'm going to go into the hand items. I'm going to delete that bow and put in a nothing item, or a just empty compound right there. If we want to check, we can see that the item is now gone out of the hand. It doesn't matter what chance it has because it's not there. And now we have this wither skeleton. It's going to be a 50-50% chance to spawn these skeletons. And this problem would still be there that we'd have this witch spawning first. So what I've done in Another World is I've created this specific mob that will spawn that dies immediately and doesn't drop anything. And it's simply this tag and spawn data for a Vex that has withering and almost no health. It just has barely any health and withering and pretty much dies immediately. So if you'd like, I'm going to leave the code for this Vex in the description. You'll see a bunch of like random crazy looking numbers in the description. If you take those numbers, you can paste them in. Let's make an example of that. So in this text document here, I've got like this string of numbers and characters, which you'll also see in the description. All you have to do is take all of these and copy them. And then if we go into our tutorial world, I'm going to click on this and make sure I get the spawn data deleted out. Then click on my block entity tag and paste this in. You're going to see that that Vex comes in, which sort of magically appeared out of all of those numbers. I'm not going to describe exactly how that works, but as you can see, we now have this Vex in here, and this just makes sure that the very first mob that comes out dies immediately, and our second one is random, which becomes our first one. I'm also going to edit a few of the spawner properties just to make it spawn a lot faster. So I'm going to change this minimum delay to 20. I'm going to change this maximum delay to 40, which makes it spawn very quickly. I'm going to set the delay to 35, which means that within 5 ticks, or 1/4 of a second, our first mob should start to spawn. I'm going to turn down my spawn range just to 1. I want everything to spawn really close. I want my spawn count to also be 1. I want the max nearby to also be 1, because I only want one of these spawning nearby at once. And the player range, I'm just going to knock up a little bit so I don't have to be so very close to it. And then I'm going to hit the check mark button right here. And now we have our custom item spawner. Let's save this in and go into Cemu. So I'm just booting the world back up right now. I'm going to get these set into peaceful just so I don't have a bunch of stuff spawning right next to me. And if we look at this item in my inventory, we're going to see that we cannot tell it's custom at all. I probably should have named that in retrospect. But if I place down this spawner, you're going to see it starts with that Vex. Vex is going to spawn and die immediately, meaning our first mob is a skeleton. So if I kept placing this down, though, we keep having that random chance to start with either the skeleton. See, now we started with the Wither skeleton. Whereas if we just had that Vex as one of these 2 mobs in the spawn data, we would know which one is going to spawn first. But as you can see, if I wanted to, I could just place this down somewhere. So let's go back actually closer to the other spawner over here. But I could place this down and it effectively becomes the same type of spawner. It will just stay here forever once that spawn data is gone and spawn skeletons and wither skeletons as long as I'm close enough to it. As we can see, since there's 1 skeleton and wither skeleton nearby, it will not spawn more of them because the max nearby is 1. If I get these pushed away though, so let's get these skeletons pushed away. They have really high knockback resistance. We can see more skeletons spawning in because the skeletons have now moved a distance enough away where they can spawn. See, now we're going to get a skeleton because the skeleton is far enough away. And they're spawning really quickly because we set that spawn to be really fast. And that is going to be it for today's tutorial. I know there was a lot covered today and a lot of information and a lot of data, but that's because mob spawners are a really relatively complex thing and there's a lot to be covered with them. But I hope this information was helpful to you and you can make some very cool mob spawner stuff. I've only really recently learned about the placeable mob spawners, but they're really cool and really helpful. But that's going to be it for today. If you'd like to check out any of my other tutorials, perhaps about modded villagers or preparing to do some modding, you can check out the playlist right here. Have a good day, folks.